So, good afternoon, listeners, and welcome to another Candid Coffee. And today we have Candid Coffee with one of the most fun people I've met in a very long time. That is Dr. Keith Kantor. Dr. Keith, welcome to Candid Coffee.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
And listeners, I must share with you. So, Keith and I have had a little bit of a conversation before we started recording the session. And so much fun. I think in the last 10, 15 minutes, we had so much laughter. And that's what I'm beginning to really enjoy about Keith is the gravitas of the work that he does is incredible, but he does it with an incredible sense of humor and a sense of fun that lightens the mood while allows us to do really hard and heavy work. Now, in understanding Keith as well, and just walking through his resume, you realize you're dealing with someone who's extremely accomplished. Apart from his academic qualifications, he has a PhD in naturopathic medicine. He also has done a nutritional science, a PhD in nutritional science. So, of course, we're talking about extreme academic accomplishment. But in addition to that, he's been able to take his academic accomplishment and utilize it to do real good in the world, both from his work as CEOs of various companies, but also now the work that he's doing from a board service perspective. So it's my wonderful pleasure today to have Dr. Keith Kantor with us. So Keith, I'd love for you to share a little bit with our listeners around what your journey has been like. I loved when you shared with me, you're from the Bronx, so you come with a very strong sense of humor already. But I'd love for you to share with the listeners your journey and how that has shaped who you are today.
Well, I think where you're from, your either culture, it could be ethnic, it could be, like the Bronx isn't really ethnic, but it does shape you. Where I'm from is considered probably at least one of the poorest parts of the United States. Now, I think Appalachia might be number one, but the Bronx is way up there. But when we grew up, we didn't know we were poor because everybody was the same. You would brag about how big your muscles were, but nobody bragged that their father was a lawyer or that they had a big house. We all lived in the same apartment building with the same little 400, 500 square foot. So I didn't know that I was poor until I left and finally got a house, and I guess wasn't poor anymore, but I didn't even realize it. So when you do grow up that way, you have a different value system since it's not based on monetary things at the beginning. So loyalty was a very big deal when you come from a place like the Bronx, where everybody lived in little groups. And I carried that loyalty. I still do. That's probably my biggest asset and my greatest fault, depending on if you're looking at a business as an owner, it's an unbelievable asset. I've started several very successful businesses. If you're looking at it as a stakeholder, it's negative because I'll keep people that I started with that aren't as efficient anymore, aren't trying as hard anymore, but out of loyalty, I'll keep them and keep moving them around because I don't want to let them go,
okay.
Which from a stakeholder point of view, isn't the smartest way to build value. But there's a difference between starting a business and building value in the business for non-participating stakeholders. And there's a big difference. There's almost two different types of personalities that you need. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned from Veblen is you have to isolate your thinking to think more like a stakeholder when you're a board member. Also, I was in the Marines, I don't know if you noticed it, for 40 years,
Wow.
United States Marine Corps. So I went in right after college, and then I stayed so many years active, but most of the time was in the reserves. And that teaches you, that's way less monetary than most type jobs, even though you're in charge of a huge budget and depending on what rank you are at the time, hundreds and hundreds of people. And that teaches you a different type of leadership where it's really important that the people want to follow you and not for the paycheck. So if you're able to transfer that into business, you have a great organization.
That's very interesting. And I love what you just shared, right? Developing fellowship that is independent of what you can give to somebody, but relies on the value that you are sharing and developing for not just yourself, for a broad organization, is incredibly powerful, right? In that.
Especially in a smaller business, like my businesses were relative. I had 250 employees.
Right.
So it's relatively small. And they wanted to work there. I mean, I try to pay well and do all the things that you should do. But it was almost like a big family. And you're able to do that, or some people are able to do that in business. But unfortunately, you can't do that really with a huge business.
Right.
Or it's much harder. The only person I ever known to be able to do that is, do you remember who Ross Perot is?
I do, yeah.
Well, people wanted to work for him. And he had a huge business. EMS, I think it was called. It was eventually sold to General Motors. But because he did things so above and beyond for his employees,
right,
that people would take less money just so they could say they work for that company. And that's one of the things that I try to emulate in my business career.
That's, and you, what you shared right now, Keith, is so incredible and so indicative of what many organizations try to capture in their endeavor to ensure that their employees are happy, satisfied, and retain their employees, right? How do you create a culture there where people want to work for the organization and will aim to work for the organization? And I think that, to your point, happens by design and not by accident. You have to actually put effort into this work, right?
Well, you have to truly lead by example. And that's what I try to do. You had to do that in the Marines if you were going to be a successful officer. So I learned that when I was fairly young. If the people truly feel appreciated and valued, and that you show them loyalty, you'll get it back tenfold.
Wow. Well, Keith, I'd love for you to share with us, when we talk about the loyalty piece as well, how has that shaped your approach to board service? Because you are numerous boards at this point in time, Keith, right? How has that shaped your approach?
Well, it's actually different than I thought. I'll build rapport right away with the stakeholders and with the board members, but you're not really involved with the employees.
Right.
So it's different. So that's when you have to put on your stakeholder hat versus your owner-operator hat. And it's a lot different for me, because when I'm on 2 to 3 boards I'm on, I happen to be the chairman. So I tend to demand, for lack of a better word, much more from a board than most of the boards are used to. But what I was able to do with every board I'm on, they started out as advisory boards, and I was able to switch them almost immediately to regular boards to paid board seats when you hit certain landmarks, and stock when you hit certain landmarks. And I did that in most cases on my first or second meeting. I said, you could have people that you want that want to do this because they're learning,
Right.
they like helping people, and it's good for their resume.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could have people that want those three things, plus they hope that it could help make them wealthy. I think if you could combine those, you'll have a much more active board. And as long as you set landmarks, it really doesn't cost you anything.
Right.
We have to do this much before I could pay you. We have to hit this IBDA before I could give out stock. If you do it like that and you have everybody striving for the same thing, I think that's stronger than just doing it for great experience and to learn and for your resume. So I've switched every board that I'm on from an advisory board to a paid board seat. And when you do that, the other members of the board gravitate towards you because you just changed in one meeting what they were doing for free, never talking about pay or stock, to a paid board seat with stock. So
Yes.
we're able to get the loyalty that way. But
So,
I used to be able to do that with the employees.
right. So Keith, tell me then, because I'm really interested now. You've been able to switch advisory boards into paid boards. How did you do that?
I just explained to the stakeholder, what do you want? Do you want A, what the typical Veblen director does and you get at the beginning? Or do you want B, what a real director or a great director will be? And I just show them the difference. And I tell them it doesn't cost you anything. Right now, you're not making any money. As soon as you have an EBITDA of $1 million, you pay us all. And you have us, and we set all of our goals to make, that's the first step, to make $1 million. Then as soon as the EBITDA is 10 million, we all get stock in the company. You figure out how much, etc. Make sure we deserve it, but you do that. And you set those landmarks from the division, from the beginning, and you have everybody pulling for the same thing.
Right.
And I'm with a company called STEM Reps.
Yeah.
STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
He's having trouble raising money. Because even though he's been doing it for a number of years, it doesn't make, makes 20, 30, 40, $50,000 a year. So I made some changes, with the stakeholders' permission, went over it, switched the board, and now we're not even trying to raise money because I showed him how to raise $100,000 without any investors. And they were thrilled. As a matter of fact, we have our meeting tomorrow to go over with the rest of the board that we eliminated that whole step of having to raise funds and we could start.
That's wonderful.
It was just in a conversation. And I did the same thing with each board. You said Nam?
Yes.
Well, I should have had you talk to him beforehand, but his was an advisory board. And I went over a bunch of things with him at the beginning. I was the first board member, and he changed it upon my request to a regular board, paid board with stock. Once we do certain things,
Right.
and then I was lucky enough to give him a connection to help him do those things pretty quickly. So he made me the chairman, but it was just convincing them which is a better value. We're supposed to bring value. That's the job of a board of a director, is to bring value to the company.
Right.
So which do you think will bring you more value?
Right.
And so far, 3 out of 3. It doesn't say it works 100%, but I'm batting 100
Pretty
right now.
close.
Which brings more value, and it's obvious. As a matter of fact, I actually spoke. Yeah, he said I could say it. I spoke to Callum because I had an idea that I actually got from one of the boards. And I went over I asked to talk to Callum, sent him a email. He got back in touch with me. I gave him my idea and he goes, okay, I love it. He goes, okay. He goes, I won't be able to start it for about 3 weeks. I said, that's okay. I'm just glad you really like the idea. And then I wrote him afterwards after we talked about it. I said, hey, I want to do this because I write down like a journal sort on my LinkedIn, the
Yeah.
journey. I said, could I mention this in the journey? And that's when he said, he goes, yes, but I don't think I'll be starting it for about 3 weeks. I said, I don't care as long as you're going to start it. It shows what I was able to do. I brought value to Veblen.
Right.
Veblen was really supposed to bring value to me, which it did. But I said, that's a good part of the journey. But you know how now he's talking about ownership and everything. I asked him to set up a marketplace where people could bring investors or investors could come that want to get into the very, very ground floor on the companies that people like me may start. And if you think of it, every big company you know the name of started in a garage or a dormitory. How would you like to be an investor there that invests 50,000 or 100,000 or $1 million? You're not talking about billions of dollars, but those are the investors that make the most money.
Right.
And work it out that the people who bring them get a certain amount of money, but only when, Veblen makes money when the money actually changes hands. You get whatever 5 or 6%. And the other half is split between who brought the business and who brought the investor.
Right.
Now all the people in Veblen are making money, but it'll still help with your marketing of memberships. Because now you're not just helping them be on the board of directors, you're helping them raise money or be in contact with people that raise money, and it just made the memberships more valuable.
Right.
So I ran that by Callum, and you've seen the last few emails about doing different things like that. So I was excited.
Keith, what's really interesting in what you share is the ability you have to step in and see how value can be generated regardless of the business that you are entering, right? You have a unique ability to step in and do that. And I think that's extremely powerful and unique, as I mentioned as well. But as you said, brings tremendous value to the organization with which you are working, be it Veblen, be it any of the other companies, STEM reps, etc. Tell me, Keith, when we think about aspiring board members who are interested now in board service as well, what advice would you give them? How would you advise them to start their journey? What should they do?
Well, first you have to do all the modules. I really did learn a lot. I never knew what ESG was. I knew what diversity was, but I never knew what ESG was. And now I found out that all the big investment houses will not invest with you at all, zero, if you don't have a good ESG program.
Right.
Rock just point blank says it in writing. If you don't have what they consider a good ESG program, regardless of your numbers, we won't invest with you. So that was a big learning experience. But if you remember in one of the earlier modules, it said, say what you want to do, what you're going to bring to the boards. That should be in your criteria somehow. And they should know that. So I redid my LinkedIn and I redid my CV. got excellent results from it. I paid somebody to do it, but I got excellent results from it, and I started getting asked. I started getting like, I still get, I bet you, 10 requests a week to apply for a board. And I wish it was my dazzling personality, but I think it's because I have a really good LinkedIn and CV. But the point is, when they asked me to do that, I said I wanted to bring value. And Callum came back and said to me, okay, well, that's good, but you have to be more specific. So I made my journey. And if you looked at my LinkedIn and see any of my posts, I'll post about once a week what's going on with the journey with Veblen, which is really my journey to build value for other companies and really any situation that I'm involved in. And one example I gave, which I know nobody would like, but it's really true. You know what Amway is?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know what Amway is.
Now, all the people that are really, really good in Amway, because that made like more millionaires than almost any company, Amway, they talk about it every second of their life. Everything they do is it. Well, if you want to build value, you have to look at every situation, every person you meet, and think of how you could bring value to that person, to that situation, to that business, and always be thinking that way.
Right.
And that's the only comparison to Amway. But that's how I think. When I met Ralph White, I'll tell you a short anecdote. Ralph owns a cafe. And I think, he's just about one of the earliest members of Veblen. And he has a cafe, it does coffee, it also does wine. When I made arrangements to meet him, I did a little research beforehand, and I had a friend who had a wine club. I never heard of a coffee club, but I found out they do have a few coffee clubs. So then I did some more research, and I saw they don't have a wine and coffee club, combined, or at least they don't in Georgia, in Atlanta. So when I went there, I had it all written out on a piece of paper, like a whatever, three by five piece of paper. And I showed him what I came up with, and he goes, that I could make $100,000 a year on that. I said, that's what I figured. It's $80,000 to $100,000 a year. He goes, if this was public, that'd be $2 million. And I said, and think of the price he got for it: 2 bagels with cream cheese and a soda pop. because he paid for lunch. But he loved the idea, and he's pursuing it now. Now, there was no reason for me to do that. I didn't ask him for anything for it. But in his mind, and he's the first Veblener to get a public board seat, by the way. But in his mind, I believe I bring value.
Right. So
And
Keith,
now it's where that word gets around.
I agree.
I try to do it with anything that I do, and try to make sure it's a two-way street, or even I'm giving more than I'm getting.
Right.
But when that word gets out, then everybody wants you.
I agree. So I'm hearing from you, Keith, 2 things that aspiring board members should keep in mind, right? Is always have a learning mindset. So learn, right? You shared your ESG example as learning, and how that learning positions you well to understand what's happening in an environment today, right? What's topical, what's important. And then the second key thing I'm hearing from you as well is determining the value that you bring for stakeholders, be it individual stakeholders and boards as well. And I love your examples that you shared to demonstrate that. And both things are powerful, but also they work, right?
Well, so far they work. I mean, I have the huge experience since July 5th, but in that short period of time, it's worked very well. I'm on 3 paid boards, which is pretty good, and I'm chairman of 2 of them. And it's exciting. That's what I like. One of the differences is when you're I don't know the real age, but I'd say the average age of the average Veblaner is probably in the early 40s, I would guess.
Mhm.
I'm a little bit past that. But when I was younger, I was extremely money motivated. As you get older, assuming money isn't an issue for you, you change from being money motivated into, at least in my case, what can I do to help people? What's the best way to help people? And it's not working for a charity, which I've done. Have you ever heard of NAMI?
No, I haven't.
It's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It's a
Oh,
big national charity in the United States, and I was vice president of that for 2 years. But the best way to help people is by making businesses successful. And people don't think of that, but tell me, I'm just making sure my phone's off. What created more value or helped more people than a company like Microsoft being successful, or Google, or Amazon? If I'm not mistaken, Amazon during COVID hired 600,000 Americans. I don't think any nonprofits did that.
Right.
So it's a great way to help people. And depending on where you are in your cycle of life, it's a great way to make money.
Right.
It's the old expression, the easiest way in the world to make money is to help other people make money. And it's really true.
Right. That's the value also that you're bringing to the board as well, right? Helping them grow commercially and helping other stakeholders around the board actually benefit as well at the same
And the
time.
customers and the employees.
Absolutely.
So you're helping a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's
So
enjoyable.
Keith, can you share with our listeners in the last couple of minutes as well some of your biggest learnings that you actually thought differently when you got onto a board and you realized, we have to change this? So something that changed your mindset around a board.
Well, there's a few things. One is, and I mentioned this already, you have to have a different mindset. When you're on a board, you have to think like a stakeholder. When you're running a business, even if you're the owner operator, you're thinking like an owner operator. And those are 2 different things. As an owner operator, you have to build a strong base. You may lose some money to build that. Well, that's where the loyalty and comes in to build a strong foundation. Whereas a stakeholder, you're looking more at numbers.
Right.
And making sure. So that was one thing I noticed the difference of. The other thing, before I got involved in Veblen, because I've been on boards before, but they were almost always boards where I owned the company. So it's not the same thing. But when you go through the modules, they tell you, okay, when you're a member of a board, you're not an advisor, you're not a consultant. You have to look at the 20,000 foot view, and your main job, almost your only job, is to increase the value of that company, increase the value for the stakeholders, for everybody involved in the company. And that's how I went into it. But what I found is if the companies are small enough at the beginning, it's more like it's your own company, except you don't deal with the employees.
Right.
But you're doing it almost more like I had to switch back, my hat, because what they're teaching us really is how to be an effective board member for a public company. It's going to be fairly big if they're public, relatively speaking.
Right.
And when you have these startups, which at the beginning, that's what most of them are with Veblen or micro, I guess you'd call it. They need more hands-on. So like with STEM reps, I said, okay, let's not try to raise money. You raise the money, and the hardest part of raising money is people want to see proof of concept. You don't have it. I said, so I'm going to set up proof of concept. And while we do the proof of concept, we're going to sell, but we're going to sell for a founder's, setup.
Right.
That'll raise the money while we're doing it. And the founders will get extra things like a cheaper price, like a little bit of the profits of the company. But it eliminates the step of raising funds, because now you're raising the funds through sales. And it proves the concept at the same time. So if we need another round of financing, now it's easy.
Right.
If I have to say to someone, well, no, we don't make any money. No, we don't get paid. No, that's one way to raise money. Then you tell them the ideas and say, oh, no, we had an EBIT of over $1 million in our first 90 days from the rollout. Now we're looking for this. That's a whole different conversation to investors. And how much of that was profit? Well, it was either profit or reinvested, almost all of it.
Right.
And they just, their eyes, that's a easier way to do things once you've proven the concept. But that was the difference I found in Veblen. They're teaching us, which they should, to be a board member for a PLC. And what we get at the beginning is at such an early stage, you have to be more of an advisor, a consultant, and almost more hands-on.
Right.
And bring it to a PLC. And I know this company that I could, once it reaches certain numbers, I could take the companies public like that. Because that's what Callum's company does. That was my first investment in Veblen.
Oh, it's fantastic.
It was what is it? LBH? What's it? SBH? MBH.
MBH.
Company that buys
other
companies. And I made a huge investment of $100. Do you remember that's like in one of the first modules?
Yes.
So I wrote Callum and I said, now that I own a big part of your company and you sort of work for me, you could still just call me Keith. That was the first email I sent them. But the truth is, I did call him up and I said, do you have certain criteria? And he said, yeah. I said, give me the criteria. I'll get you. How much more valuable will the company be if you have a waiting list of companies that want to go public? He said, much more. I said, okay, give me the criteria and then tell me how to do it. And I'll do it because I'm doing it with the boards. I tell them right away, as soon as we do this and this, I could get us taken public.
Well, Keith, it has certainly been fascinating. There's so much to learn from you, both as you shared, what should aspiring board members look for, having a learning mindset, really thinking about their value that they bring to an organization, to a board, to really walking us through the kind of ahas you've had when you've joined a board, right? How to be a stakeholder around a table, but also to understand that at sometimes, while you want to be a stakeholder, you also have to get involved, especially when you're an advisory part of that as well. And I also really like what you said, right? Primary job of a board member is to really help to increase the value of the organization that you are with. And of course, taking care of that organization in terms of its regulatory, etc., right? Its responsibilities, compliance and regulatory responsibilities that it has to deal with. So, Keith, I know we've come to the end of our conversation. It's been wonderful to talk with you and learn from your experience. And I love the examples you shared with us along the way because it makes it tangible for aspiring board members. Any last words, Keith?
Nothing that I could think of, but if any of the Vebleners want to get I know this goes to a lot of other people besides them, but want to get in touch with me, I'm sure you give them some form of contact information. I'm pretty friendly, or I'm real friendly. Any way I could help, I enjoy doing it.
Awesome. Awesome.
That old expression, when you can't play anymore, like teach.
Yeah.
Well, sort of the same thing when you reach a certain age. That's where you get your joy from.
That's wonderful, Keith. And I can just see that joy coming out in you during this conversation where you shared so much of your experience with us as well. So, listeners, thank you so much for joining us today on Candid Coffee with Dr. Keith Cantor. Keith was kind enough to spend his time, his energy with us, but also share his experiences. As he said, Keith is on LinkedIn, so you can contact him and contact him to learn from his experience because it's varied, it's broad, it's also deep, and it's also steeped in wisdom as well as fun and laughter. So, Dr. Keith, thank you so much for joining us today. And listeners, we shall catch you at the next Candid Coffee.